Thank you for joining us for the Orange County Arts Council's virtual studio visit. This program is made possible by donations from people like you. 50% of donations go directly to the artists featured, and 50% to Orange County Arts Council programs. Please consider donating today. You can donate by going to ocartscouncil.org. The Arts Council's virtual studio visits are presented in partnership with the Newburgh Free Library and are made possible in part by NYSCA, the New York State Council on the Arts.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cody Rounds, and I have the pleasure of leading you through the online virtual studio tour with Joan Bankemper. Thank you for coming again. Please keep yourselves muted throughout the tour and utilize the chat function to the right, I believe it is, to ask any questions, and we will weave them into the discussion. One nice part about this kind of new online centric world that we have is that we have participants from all over. So go ahead and use the chat function and tell us where you guys are from. So welcome, Joan. There's a lot more than meets the eye to Joan's work. You guys are gonna really see a lot of visual, stunning, fantastical works, but the real magic to Joan's practice and art is the complexity of the content and the philosophies underneath all of the visuals. So Joan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your work? Thank you for being here. Maybe start with how you began making, a little bit about your process.
Hi, and thanks everybody for joining the studio visit and entering my site virtually. And hi, Cody, thanks. I guess it's I'm going to jump around and I'm going to totally hypertext probably throughout this whole hour. Because as I saw this 15-minute video montage, I was thinking I went to Kansas City Art Institute for undergraduate work, and Agnes Martin was a guest speaker, and I was so excited to see her. And I thought wow, Agnes Martin. So I went to the auditorium, and for an hour, she showed slides of the beach. And it was really just one picture after another of the sand and the beach coming in. And then she just talked about how lovely the beach was. And I'm thinking to myself as a 20-year-old, I'm thinking this is really crazy. But it took me years to understand that in that perversity of the silence and the repetition of the beach and the meditation of it, it was profound. So as I'm looking at the studio visit, I'm looking at these images of the chickens and the rooster and the farm. It's sort of, I had to laugh because there was sort of a parallel between me watching Agnes Martin talk about the beach, for an hour, and maybe that's what we should do, is just look at chickens for an hour. That might be a beautiful kind of provocative experience in itself, which is totally art related. But that was just a thought I had today. And Cody, whenever you want to jump in and interrupt me. I'm all for it. But I guess I matured as an artist when in my 30s, and I moved to New York and I started gardening on my roof. And I changed I threw away all my academic objects I made in undergraduate and graduate school, and I started just gardening. And that became the premise of my the sculptural venue. So from doing a medicinal garden at the BRC on Christie and Rivington downtown, and taking it to the gallery, what happens and how do we contextualize art and what art is? Anyway, I'm so from that period of pushing the boundaries of how art existed and what it can do and how it enters the community, I started making these objects because I figured I had to make a living. And so I started making kind of benign vases out of recycled old dishes. And from there, they just developed into this fantastical experience or object. It's a maximist opposed to a minimalist point of view. And I always thought I'd be a minimalist because I always thought male high art was minimalist, and that's what I wanted to be, but I'm not. So anyway, so that kind of is, there's a lot, I'm older now. My art making's been going on for 35 years. So there's a lot of different layers and stratas to where I'm at now.
So you're talking a lot about gardens, growing. I see a lot of tending, and now you're in the way you describe your art practice. It sounds like a garden in itself, evolving, and that you leave a lot of room for your practice to grow in the way that it needs to, with yourself almost a little bit removed.
Well, it's because projects I did were. It was like, which artery do you need now? So if you're doing a community garden with creative time outside the Anchorage, in 1993, which was perverse to hear of people using vegetation as the medium and incorporating the community into that, or then going to Charlotte, North Carolina, and doing a full-on community garden, nurturing two diverse socioeconomic groups, from the Fourth Ward, and having, two Bank America employees merging these two communities, or San Antonio, or the Gardner Museum. So those were public events that were provocations in how the boundaries were. I was breaking those boundaries down. Today, at this age, I got the barn in 2008, the farm, and I'm starting to grow black currants. So I have about 200 black currant bushes, which you would have seen pictures of. And black currants are a superfood. So what I'm doing is creating jam and jellies and reserving all, or using every part of the black currant because it's a superfood, and giving it away. The same way with the chickens. The chickens are beautiful, and it's an environmentally, it's part of the eco chain. But it's giving the eggs away too. That is part about creating a bigger picture of how we exist in the community. And is that really about art making, or is that my philosophy, or it's all of it? And I'm, again, totally always blurring the boundaries, or hoping, not even hoping, it's just a matter of who I am. It's, blurring those boundaries of what art is and how it functions.
So we have one question. Where is your studio, this farm that we're seeing?
The farm is on East Ridge Road in Warwick, New York. It's not far from Seligman House or Seligman Museum. It's near Chester, near all the black dirt. And I totally groove on all the black dirt. The black dirt farmers are amazing. And it's a really special place, Warwick, as people know, as a lot of people in Orange County know.
So you're talking a lot about gardening, the farming. We're seeing all of this kind of ecosystem developing. How does this relate to these sculptures that we're seeing now?
Those ones you're seeing right there are what they're funereal urns. And I pushed, during the isolation, during the lockdown, I canned the other work and just focused on making funereal urns. And what I realized in that period is that the initial sculptures, other than the public art was going on and the gardens were starting. But doing my first show was in 1993, which was at Brent Sycamore, really good gallery in Soho at the time. So I told him I'd make him a free garden. And in 1993, 1993, AIDS was upon us. It was a pretty dark time to be in Manhattan. So the gallery was dedicating itself to a lot of experiences that, the survivors of AIDS, people that were mourning and grieving. And I decided to make these medicinal urns out of broken shards. And I planted medicinal herbs in the containers, because it was about healing after things that are breaking. And that was the genesis of the sculptures. That was like, and it had to do with how do you expand the idea of a garden, but putting another layer to it. Then it's not just a garden, but it's a medicinal garden. And you can research what medicinal properties there are in the containers. And that, I didn't tell Brent that it was sculpture, because I figured I'm a woman, and anytime at that point I was like, I'm just going to put this on his windowsill. He loved coming to my roof garden. And at the opening, I put up a plaque that said it's a medicinal garden, in honor of a lot of our friends that had died, but also a pamphlet with medicinal herbs. And I called it a sculpture garden. So I think that I did a few of these kind of guerrilla projects in Soho that then, as people saw them, it was like an aha moment, that then it led on to, the new museum, or Artpace in San Antonio, or the McColl Center in Charlotte, or the Gardner Museum. But a lot of times you have to do things that are guerrilla. I called them guerrilla projects because they really weren't authorized per se, but the vision was that you have to kind of do things sometimes without authority until they catch on. And that was the case with this. And I think as a woman, it took me 30 years at that point. I was like 33 when I did that, but it was a bold gesture. But getting back to what it did in the spring, when I started making the funereal urns, and they're functioning funereal urns, I realized I was actually going full circle with my work. And I think that there's this, I'm going to calm down a little bit, but I think there's this notion of shit happens. And that, Cody, you talked about these being very beautiful work, and they're eye candy in many ways, but it's all based on breakage, in that shit happens, things fall apart, center cannot hold. And it's out of destruction, or out of falling off the horse, or how do you reorganize when you've had failure? That I think that I embrace that philosophy, and I think it's part of the work. But I think we're seduced into liking it, or some people are repulsed by it, and that's okay too. I'm repulsed by it many times. But it's sort of, that's the closest I can come to what I think is authentically me, and in my world.